Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of our three-part webinar series on leveraging influencers at all stages of the marketing funnel. Today, we are going to be talking about upper funnel awareness objectives. So introducing myself real quick, my name is Erin Ledbetter. I am Senior Vice President with Carusele Media. We are a performance-based influencer marketing company. To do a couple quick pieces of housekeeping today, just to get you up to speed before we get started. We will have some time at the end. I'm hoping to talk very fast today because I want to get this done in 30 minutes, but I do want to make sure we have time for questions. So feel free to jot down questions throughout, and you can do that in the chat window. We are also recording today's webinar, and so we will send you a copy of the recording through email. And if you would like to tweet during the webinar, we are watching our Twitter account. That's at Carusele, spelled the funny way that you see down there, and you can use the hashtag #influencerwebinar. So I'd like to start today with a poll just so I can understand where we are at in terms of the audience that is attending today. So tell me, what is the primary objective of your current influencer marketing efforts? Are you really focused on awareness? Are you finding that engagement is key, sales, either online or in store? I see some people haven't even executed yet, so great, welcome to the party. We'll help you with that today. And I'm seeing this a lot, actually. Social follower growth is coming in as a question we're seeing from folks on the new business side of things. So interested if that's anyone's objective here today as well. Give you just another second or two before I end this poll. All right, guys, thank you. So I'm seeing come in, we've got most folks focused on either awareness or engagement, and then a couple people saying sales online and in store as well. So good news for those of you guys focused exclusively on sales. We do have another webinar coming up on that as well. Today we're going to be focused just on those upper funnel objectives. But we should definitely, have something to help everybody out today. So I will start diving in. Did you guys know that influencer marketing is 15 years old? When I started pulling this webinar together and I did that math, I realized that influencer marketing in its modern digital approach has been going on for 15 years, which first made me feel very, very old. But then also, led me to, really start to think about the last few years. This 15-year-old practice has just exploded. And we're seeing marketers truly in love with influencer marketing, and for good reason. 20%, almost 20% of all content consumed online these days is created by influencers. That's a pretty staggering amount. 92% of marketers are saying that they feel like their influencer marketing campaigns are effective. And then we're projecting this year that about $2 billion will be spent in influencer marketing alone. So, there's good reason why you guys are here today and wanting to understand how to really drive brand objectives with influencer marketing. But we're seeing a lot of marketers still struggling. 75% reported to eMarketer this year that ROI of their influencer programs was a top challenge. So today our goal is to help you break down how we get to ROI and really be able to explain the benefit of influencer marketing at different points of the consumer journey. So I want to ground us first in a methodology that is very important to us here at Carusele, something that you guys may also be familiar with. It's a It's a method coined by Forrester Research. It's called POST. We love it because it really grounds us first in who are the people we're trying to reach, who's our audience, and what objectives are we trying to achieve. I find far too often that influencer marketing becomes a checkbox in a major marketing campaign, and we've got to make sure we've got influencers included, and Instagram's a key channel for us. So let's get influencers talking about us on Instagram. And hey, stories are really cool these days. So let's have them create a story too, because that might drive some clicks. And I hear that a lot. I get briefed on campaigns like that a lot. And what I find is we're not starting first with who are we trying to reach and what objectives are we trying to get to. And so we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about that upper funnel awareness driving objective and how your campaign needs to be designed if that's what you're trying to achieve. The strategies and tactics will follow once we know what our objective is. So another poll, I'm going to keep this one pretty short. I just want a yes or no answer. And I want to know, how are you currently calculating or are you currently using impressions as a key performance metric for your campaigns? Ready, go. 5 seconds for this one. Not surprising to see that most people here are calculating impressions, or using impressions as a metric of success for their influencer efforts. Now, I'm glad you guys are here because one of the things that we want to start with today is that impressions are not a measure of success. And here's why. It really goes down to the fact that this industry is 15 years old, and the way we've been calculating impressions hasn't changed in about 15 years. I have a bunch of magazines on this slide, not because influencers are showing up on magazines these days, which they are, but because if you've been around marketing for a while like me, you remember the days where an ad salesperson from a magazine would come in and they would say, hey, we've got 1 million subscribers. And did you know that those subscribers, they put our magazines on their coffee tables, and on average, 2.5 people are going to pick up that magazine. So really, you're going to reach 3.5 million people with your ad. Okay, but my ad's on page 65, and if your household's like mine, it's the 4-year-old that is one of those 2.5 people that is picking up that magazine. So not who I want to reach, and she's likely not seeing my ad on page 65 anyway. Yet today, that's how a lot of influencer campaigns are still calculating impressions. We're assuming that if an influencer has 100 followers on Twitter and they tweet 3 times, that's 300 impressions. Well, that's super fake, as we like to call it around here, because we know that organic reach on Twitter is not 100%. Actually, on Twitter, for example, it's about 3.5%. So really, of those 100 followers, only 3.5 people even have the chance to see that post. We don't even know if they're actually seeing it, but it's even being loaded in the feed for that 3.5 people. We're seeing other influencer companies add in viral impressions to this, which I'm just going to dub super, super fake, because the way that works is, now if my tweet got retweeted 100 times and the average Twitter follower has 130 followers, then now all of a sudden I have 13,000 more impressions on that tweet. Again, we know those numbers are super inflated, and so for us here at Carusele, we're focused on what we call true views. Now, again, talking about how influencer hasn't evolved in about 15 years, on the media side of things, if you also buy media, you know that viewable impressions, let's rewind about 2 years, viewable impressions in media was the big controversy. It's very important to brands that we have verified viewable impressions. On the influencer side of things, because we don't own these platforms, and because channels like Facebook and Twitter like to keep things, like to control their data, while the influencer can see some of these data points, we as marketers can't always get down to what the actual viewable impressions are in influencer content. So where we can't get them, although we can get them in a lot of channels these days, where we can't get them, we have to estimate. So on blogs or Pinterest, for example, that might be less than 1% of the total followers for those channels. So where we do have to make those estimations, we do recommend the estimation be conservative, but that's how we get to understanding what the real scale of these awareness programs are. But keep in mind, scale is not a measure of whether we actually drove any lift for your brand. And so I'm going to cover 3 metrics here. The first being ad recall rate, which is a metric that is one that you should feel good about walking into your boss's office and saying, look, this is what this campaign actually did for our brand. Ad recall rate is a metric that is used across a variety of different marketing media. In this case, we're talking about ad recall rate as a number that Facebook actually provides us. It's the percent of your audience likely to remember the content 48 hours later. And the reason I love this metric is because we know from research done by Nielsen that ad recall rate is the metric that best correlates with effectiveness in terms of brand awareness and consideration. So there's a lot of other metrics that they looked at, and we know that if someone recalls our ad, they are likely to then be aware of our brand, remember our brand 48 hours later, and we get added to their consideration set. So we measure ad recall rate for these awareness campaigns, but it's important that you know we can only get ad recall rate if you're running a certain type of media on the influencer content. And I'll talk a little bit later when we get into tactics about the types of media that you want to run and how you might run those. Another example of a measure of success that you might want to look at to determine if an upper funnel campaign really did what you needed it to do is doing a custom brand lift study. So on the right-hand side here, I actually have a case study example from a company called Group RFC, which can run these studies. There's a bunch of companies out there that can do these, but what's important is you work with a company to run these studies that is making sure that your sample is valid. And in order to do that, you have to understand not just who you targeted with your campaign, but who your campaign actually reached and engaged. So that's not something that these companies can tell you. That's something you have to be able to get that data to. And then once you know who the content actually got in front of, you can give that audience profile to a company like Group FC here, RFC here. And the way these brand lift studies work is there is a custom, it's a custom survey that's basically put in front of an exposed and a control group. They're shown the influencer content in a mock feed. So just the way they would have seen it if they were the person who was exposed to the content out in the wild. And then they're asked for certain brand lift questions and customized perception-based questions. So I love this because without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can get to a good understanding of whether this content was actually likely to have the impact you wanted it to have on the audiences that you reached. And then finally, if you're not running media, I love this audience attention metric because it's a metric that you can get with no media involvement at all. And the way you do this is you're running an estimate of the amount of time that influencers spent with influencer audiences spent with the content. And we actually did a study that helps us understand how long it takes for people to consume a Facebook post or to leave a comment or to share a piece of content on Facebook or to retweet a tweet. So having that type of information now lets us get to an audience attention calculation. And what I love about that is we can start comparing the investment you had in upper funnel influencer campaign to other upper funnel tactics like TV. So those are the three key performance indicators that if you're running an upper funnel awareness campaign, I would look to have one of those really be the measure of success for your campaign, at least one of those. But there's other important metrics that you want to make sure your campaign is set up to measure as well. These fall into three categories: value, insights, and scale. On the value side, there's the question of what did this campaign do for your brand that provides some other type of value or long-term lift. So a lot of campaigns, ours, for our clients, we're able to get 100% of the content that's published in our campaigns with an unlimited license for our clients to reuse and repurpose. Now, in doing that, that content, every photo, every blog post, every recipe, every video has value to the brand. And so understanding that long-term value is important. You also should look at things like web traffic lift. We've seen this confirmed in campaign after campaign for our clients. Google also tells us that about 70% of the people who end up coming to your website and buying after they were exposed to a piece of content online did not click through directly to purchase. And so looking at what the web traffic lift in things like direct traffic or search traffic that correlate with your influencer campaign can really give you a better sense of what the campaign's total impact was. On the insight side of thing, we do look at engagement rate. Really, engagement rate should not be the measure of success for your campaign, but it can start to tell you which pieces of content and which storylines are really being or doing the best job of getting the audience's attention. And then that helps us kind of inform future efforts. Similar with influencer performance, we find that as you reactivate influencers over and over again in an ambassador style approach, that the efficiency of your campaign goes up, your engagement rates go up. And so understanding how influencers perform can help you decide who to turn into longer term ambassadors. I mentioned doing that brand lift study with a company like Group RFC. We have what we call engaged audience profiles, but you have to have some way to understand who did this content get in front of and who engaged with that content in order to run a study like that. So really understanding your audience profile, not just who you attempted to target, but who you actually engaged is going to be key. And then on the scale side of things, really understand how wide of an impact did this campaign have. Influencer count is a metric that helps us understand that. How many different storylines and content angles got put out into the wild, and how many pieces of content were generated. So again, those pieces of content have a little bit of a long-term value. They get indexed by Google. Now you have images and photos and or images and videos and blog posts that are all starting to show up in search for your brand. That just help with that long-term awareness. So again, these aren't key performance indicators in the sense of did this campaign do what we intended it to do if our objective was an upper funnel objective, but they are metrics that are going to be important to make sure you can get as you set up your campaign. The problem is, and this is, we're going to get into the T part of the post model now, most campaigns are not set up to allow for a lot of these different types of measurements. And here's why. As I mentioned before, influencer marketing hasn't changed in 15 years, and that's because a lot of it looks like this. You have influencers create some content, they publish that content out to their social channels, and then we cross our fingers, and we really, really hope that the results work out for us. And we try to measure all this stuff, but a lot of times if you don't have media involved or you don't have certain types or certain pieces of content optimized in certain ways, you can't get to the results that we're trying to get to here, and you can't even measure to see if you drove those results at all. And so at Carusele, we do things a little bit differently. I see that we have quite a few clients on the line today, so this won't be too much of a surprise for you guys, but for those of us who for those of you who aren't as familiar with our approach is really about just leveraging the influencers and their content as a starting point. We look at their organic audiences as a focus group, because remember, if they're tweeting, we're only getting about 3.5% of that audience. Best case scenario, we're on Instagram and they're a micro influencer and we're reaching about 30%. If they're a macro influencer, we're right there with brands at under 20%. So it's really important that we don't look at just kind of the influencer and their immediate audience as the goal of this campaign, but we're using that group as a focus group to tell us what content is most likely to achieve our objectives. And we're testing and scoring every piece of organic content, and then we're starting to amplify it. And that amplification is where on upper funnel campaigns like this, we can start to get really targeted and optimize that content to make sure we're meeting our objectives. And that optimization is what really is leading to the best results that we're seeing for our clients. And so tactic number one, how are you going to negotiate these rates? So the first step, it comes down to how you are working with the influencers and how you are even bidding for the work that they're doing. And a lot of times, you'll have an influencer, you'll go to them and they have a rate card and they say, this is what it costs to do X, Y, and Z. Well, the problem is what they are pricing is based on what they need, not what the benefit to your brand is. So it's really important that as you start to negotiate with influencers, that you're paying based off the benefit your brand's going to get, not off the rate card that the influencer wants to charge. Now, it's possible that you guys are going to meet in the middle and you're going to have a great relationship, and then it's possible that the influencer is going to want to charge you more than what it makes sense for your brand to pay. Good news, if that's the case, there are plenty of other fish in the sea. I would recommend moving on and not trying to pay an influencer just what their rate card says if it's not going to deliver the results that you need for your brand. So we've got a quick calculation here. This is how at Carusele we look to try to figure out what the best rate is going to be to get our clients the most efficient results. And it comes down to what are we trying to get out of this influencer for an upper funnel campaign? We would be looking at true views. And what would the brand typically pay for a premium placement for those true views? And so we're looking at true views calculated using that CPM to get our first number. We also need to keep in mind that when you're paying an influencer, not every dollar is going to be a working dollar because they do have to create the content. And so that content creation, we need to give some value to as well. So it's not about the influencer saying every Instagram post is $5,000. No. If you were paying a freelancer to create that copy plus that image, what would you be paying that freelancer? And then you need to take the average of the brand benefit in terms of a CPM and what it's going to cost to get that content created. That'll help you get to what's a good solid bid for the influencer assignment that you are doing. It's also important because, as I mentioned, you're paying for production of the content, that we don't get creative for creative's sake. One of the things that I think happens a lot with clients is they come in and they say, well, we're sending the influencer $500 worth of product, or we're inviting them to this event and they have exclusive VIP access at this event that they would never get to go to otherwise. Well, here's the thing. Influencers don't care. They weren't going to go to your event anyway. So the fact that you're inviting them to the event just means that they have to work around your schedule. They have to get a photographer there. They have to show up and be there for 3 hours. They have to get ready for the event. Those types of things are actually going to cost you more, not less. You're covering travel. You're inviting the influencers to go stay in your hotel. Well, and depending on the type of influencer, most influencers are going to charge you for that. So it's just worth keeping in mind, in some cases, having the influencer stay in your hotel, for example, is pretty crucial to the campaign for a hotel company. But if it's not crucial to your campaign, let's not get creative for creative's sake, because it's going to flip that ROI into the negative very quickly for your campaign. It's also important that we test and score every piece of content. As we know, not all content's created equal. And so we're seeing, there are brands that are starting to put these media dollars like we do behind influencers' content. But the problem with that is not all content's created equal. And so you don't want to just put equal amounts of media behind every single post. Here at Carusele, we use what we call a double float test. And so we're determining which content is best performing on the organic side of things. We're only boosting the best of the best performing content. And then we're optimizing even within that media to make sure that the best performing content gets in front of the exact right audience. In this case, if we're doing upper funnel, we're typically optimizing for ad recall rate, which, as we know from Nielsen, is going to be the best indicator of whether your content was really driving the awareness your brand needs it to drive. So I'm going to have one more poll here. Want to ask you guys, if you are doing boosting or putting media dollars behind your content, how are you doing it, if you know? And I ask this because I'll show you in just a second how you are running the media matters in order to get to some of these key metrics that I talked about in the beginning. So I'll give you just one more minute. Real quickly, your options are you just hitting the boost button? Are you giving influencers money to boost their own content? Are you running it through a third-party software? Or are you running ads from your brand page? I do see here that most brands are either hitting the boost button, using a third-party software, or you are not boosting at all. So we'll talk about, I've already mentioned the importance of boosting, but I'll show you in a second why how you boost matters. So I am going to end this poll. Thank you, everybody, for your responses. And so here's one of the reasons it matters. So this is an example for our Haagen-Dazs client, and when you do just hit the boost button, you are limited in targeting, but you need to be sure that you're amplifying with purpose. In this example, we were actually amplifying the content. Our client was running sampling events in specific locations in New York City. Well, if you're from New York City, or if you've ever visited New York City, leaving the borough that you're in is not really something people do on a regular basis. basis. And so it's just because someone's in New York City does not mean they are going across town, because we all know that could take them an hour and a half to get there. They're not going across town just to go sample some ice cream. And so it was important that not only did we target people that had a propensity to like ice cream, so they were even likely to attend these events, but that they also were within the vicinity to actually go to these sampling events based on what their GPS data told us on their mobile phone. And so this is not something that you're going to get to if you are just looking at influencers who live in New York City, or even if you're looking at influencers whose audiences are likely to live in New York City. You've really got to use this media targeting to get down to your exact audience so you have as little waste as possible. Another example of how we get that right content in front of the right people is by building out these engaged audience profiles that I mentioned earlier. These engaged audience profiles are useful because it does help confirm that we got the content in front of the right people. But one of the unique things that we do with it is turn these engaged audience profiles into custom lookalike audiences too. So kind of like similar to the way we have these super hyper optimized audiences for the Haagen-Dazs example. When we build these custom lookalike audiences, what we find is that all the great targeting that platforms like Facebook give us still aren't as good as the machine learning we can get out of a custom lookalike audience like this. We find these lookalike audiences tend to perform about twice as well in terms of these key performance metrics when compared to more traditional approaches. And the last thing that you can't do if you are just hitting that boost button is you don't have the opportunity to do something that is a best practice recommended by Facebook, and that is to have multiple placements and test multiple different ad unit types. So if you are just hitting that boost button because the influencer might have given you that opportunity through the branded content tool, you don't have the ability to take a piece of content that was originally posted in the Facebook feed and run it in Instagram and Marketplace and Instagram Stories and all these different platforms that are available through Facebook Business Manager. And you also don't have the ability to manipulate that content. So it's really important that you do these tactics when you are doing your own media from your own channels. It's really important that you take that same approach with influencer as well if you want to optimize your campaign as best as possible. So I talked very, very fast today. We have just a couple minutes left. I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So real quick, I am going to go through. If you have questions, you can pop them into the chat box right now. I'll be able to get those. I see a couple coming in. I'll give you just a second to type quickly. And then, of course, anything I don't have time to get to today, you guys are free to email me as a follow-up. My email is Erin@Carusele. That's ERIN at Carusele, spelled the funny way, like you see in the logo right there in the top right. Erin@Carusele.com. If you have any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer them via email. So just a couple questions. I'll run through some of the top ones that came in. The first one, do you have to have a media plan with your influencer marketing campaign? Good question, because I did talk a lot about media today. The answer is no, you don't, though it's certainly something we recommend. And one of the reasons is I went through 3 metrics today: ad recall, brand lift, and audience attention. And the only one of those 3 key performance indicators for an upper funnel campaign that you can get if you don't do media is audience attention. You could do brand lift if you wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it because it's not going to be a great audience. You're not going to know who you reached, and therefore you're not going to be able to make sure that the control and exposed groups really are a fit for the audience you were going after. So definitely recommend media for the purposes of not only that measurement, but also making sure you can optimize towards things like ad recall as well. Okay, another question. I've got 2. I'm just going to answer one more, and then again, follow up with me via email if you did not get your question answered. So how do you calculate audience attention? Yeah, so I mentioned that at Carusele, we actually did a study a few years back that looked at how long it takes the average internet user to take certain actions on social content. So how long does it take a user to read through a blog post? How long does it take a user to leave a comment on a Facebook post, for example, or hit a retweet on Twitter. And by calculating that amount of time and then applying that time to the types of engagements that come through on your campaign, we can get to minutes of attention. And then I love this minutes of attention metric because it lets us start comparing the investment you had in influencer to other time-based metrics for other marketing channels. So a little bit more on that. If you want to know the full calculation, I'm happy to give it to you. Feel free to email me again. So that is all we have in terms of time today, guys. Thank you for sticking with us. I know I flew through this, trying to make sure we didn't take up too much of your time today. You will get today's recording via email as a follow-up. We'll also be sending you an ebook, the first in our series about leveraging influencers for all stages of the funnel, focused on awareness objectives. And if you want to join us for the next stage of the funnel, which is mid-funnel engagement and conversion, or sorry, not conversion, consideration and perception driving metrics. That is going to be next Tuesday at 2 p.m. So I hope you guys can join us for that. Thanks for your time, everybody.